In 1415, an African empire was about to change the world forever. Imagine standing on the shores of West Africa, watching massive wooden vessels being prepared for an extraordinary journey. These weren't European ships. They belonged to the Ming Dynasty's Chinese fleet, but the man commanding them was African. His name was Zheng He, and he was about to sail across the Indian Ocean on the first of 7 monumental voyages that would reshape global trade and prove that Africa was not isolated or primitive, but deeply connected to the world's greatest civilizations. But here's what most history books won't tell you. Africa didn't need to be discovered. Africa didn't wait for Europe to arrive before it achieved greatness. The truth is far more complex, far more powerful, and far more important than the narrative we've been taught. Let's go back even further. The year 1324. A man named Mansa Musa, the emperor of the Mali Empire, took a pilgrimage to Mecca that would stagger the medieval world with its magnificence. He traveled with 60,000 people. 80 camels carried 400 pounds of gold each. When Mansa Musa passed through Cairo, the price of gold collapsed across the entire Middle East and North Africa because of the sheer wealth he displayed. Here was an African ruler so powerful, so rich, and so influential that his single journey destabilized international markets. Yet how many of us learned this in school? The African history test isn't really a test about facts and dates, though those matter. It's a test of what we believe about ourselves and our world. It's a fundamental question about whose stories we choose to remember and whose we choose to forget. Consider the kingdom of Aksum. In 330 AD, Aksum became the first African nation to officially adopt Christianity. This wasn't a religion imposed from outside. This was a deliberate choice by King Azana, whose empire controlled crucial trade routes between Africa, Arabia, and Asia. Aksum minted its own currency, maintained its own written language in Ge'ez, and influenced the spiritual and intellectual development of the entire region. 300 years before Europe considered itself Christian, Aksum was already a Christian superpower. Now fast forward to 1591. The Songhai Empire's greatest city, Timbuktu, was home to one of Africa's most legendary centers of learning, Sankore Mosque. This wasn't a simple place of worship, it was a university. Thousands of students studied Islamic law, mathematics, astronomy, and literature. Scholars from across the Islamic world came to Timbuktu to exchange ideas. When European universities were still experimenting with basic education, Timbuktu's intellectual luminaries were producing sophisticated theological and scientific works that circulated throughout the Muslim world. These aren't isolated examples, they're patterns, they're proof. The African history test challenges us to examine our own assumptions. Why did we learn about ancient Rome and Greece, but barely whisper about Great Zimbabwe, whose stone structures rivaled medieval European fortifications? Why do we celebrate European explorers while barely mentioning the sophisticated navigation systems and maritime knowledge possessed by African and Arab sailors centuries before European ships ventured far from shore? The answer reveals something uncomfortable. History isn't objective. History is written by those with the power to write it, and for centuries, that power belonged to those who benefited from telling a particular story. A story where Africa was empty, primitive, and waiting for civilization to arrive from elsewhere. But when you examine the evidence, when you look at the archaeological records, the manuscripts, the oral histories that have been preserved, when you listen to the voices of African historians reclaiming their own narratives, a completely different picture emerges. You see sophisticated political systems. You see thriving trade networks that connected Africa to Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. You see centers of